When I think about the idea of utopian society, trying to work to make things better, I definitely think American Indian Studies has some ideas to contribute, and definitely from an Ojibwe perspective. The two things that really come to mind to me are respect and responsibility.
Okay.
So as some of the foundational sort of core values and the way that Ojibwe society ideally should operate. Not to say, again, that that's necessarily everyone does everything right all the time, of course, but the foundations behind respecting others and other viewpoints, and it's a sort of, I described it in class the other day as a little bit of a live and let live kind of philosophy, right. And in a general way that kind of works. It's like everyone has to make their own choices and their own decisions, and yet within that you should be keeping in mind respecting other people's decisions. You know, they're going to respect the fact that you have the personal autonomy and the individual right to make those, and you're going to respect their right as well. And so it gets into a balance between, I think, respect and then autonomy, but then within that autonomy you have a responsibility. And especially the way responsibility works, I think, is via relationships, whether it be family relationships or maybe friendships or colleagues or that type of thing, but responsibility so that you can see how your actions might affect others. That has to be part of the equation.
Well, I've been doing a lot of work on food systems basically because the system that we have right now is pretty close to a dystopia in that we produce a lot of food, a lot of calories that basically make people sick and are not delivered to people in an equitable way or in a healthy way. So obviously food and eating is something we all share. We all have to have it. Having access to resources that make it possible to have food that's nutritious, food that's tasty, food that you relish. I mean, maybe if we had the idea that all we really need to produce materially, culturally wise is a system that feeds people well and houses them well, that would be a utopia. And if we didn't have this process wealth accumulation as the center of these systems, but had actually serving human needs as the center of the system. You know, Gandhi said, the world has enough for everyone, but it doesn't, what did he say? The world has enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for some people's greed. And so if we could reorganize those systems to revolve around delivering what people need, that would be, to me, an utopic endeavor. And it's one that I work on pretty actively. I've been researching what it takes to make a system of food that is localized as much as possible and just and fair and rich, and getting people to celebrate what it is that feeds us. Culturally put into place mechanisms systems that bring food to people, that also bring people together around food.
I mean, obviously I teach from a non-binary perspective in terms of gender and sexuality. And I wonder, and in fact one of the questions I ask students in the sexuality class is this idea of imagining a genderless society, if you would. And few of them are able to really imagine that. And I can imagine it. I really can. I mean, genderless in terms of a binary, right. You know, in terms of roles, you know, it would take away the binaries of sexual orientation and, you know, what that is, and it would just be about individuals, and we do what we're compelled to do, and we sleep with who we're compelled to sleep with, and it's not really defined based on anything that's related to sex or gender. It seems like, I can imagine that as a utopia.
They have less extreme poverty, more access to education. Everyone's covered by healthcare. So basically, they have a lot less inequality. So the rich people are a little less rich. The poor people are a lot less poor. So it's more like a big middle class area compared to the United States, at least. So that would be sort of one utopian vision that I would have. Sort of a practical utopia would be to be more like Canada or Norway or Sweden or Japan or Germany or France. In terms of how we do healthcare and how we deal with inequality. We have a system that's been in place for a long time. It's hard to change systems. For instance, the last time we tried healthcare reform, it was basically killed off by a huge advertising campaign paid for largely by the insurance industry, saying that, oh, this is socialist healthcare, we'll all get sick and die like in communist Russia or something like this. It turns out that we're actually sicker in the United States than these other countries with universal healthcare, so it's just the opposite of what they claimed. But in the United States, we spend so much more on healthcare than other countries, and many of these profits go to these large companies that then can pay for lobbyists and PR campaigns. We pay almost an extra $1 trillion a year versus what other countries pay per person.
So the whole idea of envisioning a future and then moving towards that is, again, as I said, it's a more modernist one. And so I tend to think about use of utopian images today differently than, say, social scientists or activists of the Marxist project did with utopias. So that said, part of the activist project that I work on has to do with the commons. And so I do envision something called the commons, which is to say I envision that there's a sector of the society that is different than the market or government sector. It's called the commons sector. But is that a utopian image? And the answer is no, it's not. And I think that those of us who are working with this idea of a commons which is different than communism, which was a particular utopian vision for society, the commons is really not that project. It's not part of that modernist project. And so one of the ways in which you ensure that that mistake is not going to happen, the idea that that all the world and world history is converging into some idea of a utopian society, is that from a commons perspective, you look anthropologically at collective forms of social organization where property is shared or managed collectively and distributed more equitably. You look in different cultures for examples of that.